The gold band gleamed against the worn velvet of the pawnbroker's display case, catching the late afternoon sunlight that streamed through the dusty window of the shop in Fort McDowell, Arizona territory. And Laura Zimmerman felt her heart break all over again as she watched the broker examine the only tangible memory she had left of Thomas. The year was 1883, and the drought had stolen everything from her small ranch outside of town. 3 months had passed since Thomas died from a rattlesnake bite while checking the fence line, leaving her alone with their debts and a spread of parched land that could barely sustain the dozen cattle she had left. The bank had given her until the end of the week to make a payment, or they would take the ranch entirely. "I can give you $40, the pawnbroker said, his voice nasal and disinterested. He was a thin man with a waxed mustache that curled at the ends, and he barely looked at Laura as he spoke. "It is worth more than that," Laura said quietly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "The engraving alone cost $10 when Thomas had it made. The gold is pure." The pawnbroker shrugged, setting the ring down on the counter between them. $40 is my offer. Take it or leave it, Mrs. Zimmerman. I have other customers to attend to." Laura glanced around the empty shop, noting the lie but saying nothing. She needed the money. Pride would not pay the bank. $50, she tried one more time. 42, and that is my final offer. She closed her eyes, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks. The ring felt like the last piece of Thomas she had, the last physical proof that their love had been real, that their 3 years of marriage had meant something. But the ranch was real too. The land where they had planned to build their future, where they had talked about raising children and growing old together. "All right," she whispered, opening her eyes. $42. The pawnbroker counted out the money with practiced efficiency, and Laura took it with hands that felt numb. She turned to leave, unable to watch as he placed the ring in the case with all the other forgotten treasures and broken dreams. The heat hit her like a wall when she stepped outside onto the wooden boardwalk. Fort McDowell in August was merciless, and the sun beat down on the dusty street with relentless intensity. A few horses were tied to the hitching posts, their heads hanging low, and a wagon rattled past, kicking up clouds of red dust that settled on everything like a fine powder. Laura tucked the money into the small leather pouch she kept hidden beneath her shawl and started walking toward the bank. She had made it perhaps 20 feet when she heard the door of the pawnshop open behind her. "Now that is a fine piece," a man's voice said from inside the shop. The voice was deep, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent time in Texas. "How much are you asking?" Laura kept walking, not wanting to hear the answer, not wanting to know who would end up with the ring that Thomas had saved for months to buy. She had work to do. The bank would close in an hour, and she still needed to arrange for the payment. Inside the pawn shop, Isaac Yates held the ring up to the light, examining the delicate engraving on the inside of the band. 2 names intertwined with a date: Thomas and Laura. February 14, 1880, Valentine's Day. He had noticed the woman leaving the shop, had seen the way her shoulders had been set with determination, even as her hands shook. He had been in Fort McDowell for only 3 days, trailing a horse thief who had stolen from his employer's ranch near Prescott, but he had already heard about the widow Zimmerman and her struggles. $65, the pawnbroker said, his eyes glinting with greed. Pure gold, excellent craftsmanship, a real bargain. Isaac nearly laughed at the markup but kept his expression neutral. He was 32 years old, tall and lean from years of working cattle and riding the long trails between ranches. His hands were calloused, his face weathered from the sun, and he had a scar along his jaw from a disagreement with a longhorn that had not wanted to be branded. He had been working as a cowboy since he was 15, and he knew the value of hard work and honest dealing. "I will give you 45, Isaac said, "and not a cent more." The pawnbroker's face reddened. "Now see here, that ring is worth $42, judging by the fact that the woman who just left looked like she was going to her own hanging," Isaac interrupted. "You probably gave her less than that. 45 is generous, considering." The two men stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, the pawnbroker snatched the money Isaac had placed on the counter. "Fine, but do not expect any favors from me in the future." "I will not," Isaac said, pocketing the ring. He left the shop and stood on the boardwalk, looking up and down the street. The woman, Laura Zimmerman, had disappeared, probably into one of the buildings further down. He considered following her, but what would he say? He did not even know why he had bought the ring in the first place, only that something about the way she had held herself, the quiet dignity in her grief, had moved him in a way he had not expected. Isaac had been married once, 10 years ago. Mary had died of cholera during an outbreak in a cattle town in Kansas, and he had buried her in a cemetery where he would never visit again, because the work kept him moving, always moving. He understood loss. He understood the weight of continuing on when the person you loved was gone. He tucked the ring into his vest pocket and walked down the street to the saloon. He would figure out what to do with it later. Right now, he needed a drink and information about the horse thief. Laura emerged from the bank an hour later feeling slightly less desperate but no less empty. She had made the payment, securing her ranch for another month, but the money was gone, and she still had to figure out how to make the next payment. The cattle were too thin to sell, the land too dry to grow anything, and she had no family to turn to for help. Her parents had died from influenza when she was 20, and Thomas had been an only child whose parents had passed years before they married. She was alone in every sense of the word. The sun was beginning to set as she retrieved her horse from the livery and began the 5-mile ride back to her ranch. The land stretched out around her in shades of brown and gold, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional Joshua tree. In the distance, the mountains rose purple against the darkening sky. It was beautiful in its harsh way, and she had loved it once. She and Thomas had been so happy here, so full of plans and dreams. Now it just felt lonely. The ranch house came into view as the last light faded from the sky. It was small, just 2 rooms and a porch, but Thomas had built it with his own hands. Laura dismounted, led her horse to the small barn, and took care of the evening chores with mechanical efficiency. Feed the horse, check the cattle, draw water from the well. The routine helped keep the thoughts at bay. Inside the house, she lit a lamp and sat down at the small table where she and Thomas had shared so many meals. Her hand felt naked without the ring, and she kept touching the empty space on her finger, expecting to feel the familiar weight of the gold band. "I am sorry," she whispered to the empty room. "I am so sorry, Thomas." But Thomas could not hear her, and the house remained silent except for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. The next morning, Isaac rode out to the Zimmerman ranch with no clear plan beyond returning the ring. He had spent the previous evening asking questions in the saloon, and the picture that emerged had made him angry in a way he had not expected. Laura Zimmerman was being cheated by the bank, charged interest rates that were barely legal, and the local ranchers who could have helped her were staying away because her husband had not been from the area. Thomas Zimmerman had been an outsider, and now his widow was paying the price for his lack of connections. The ranch was smaller than Isaac had expected, just a modest house and barn with a corral that held a few thin cattle. He could see a woman working near the well, drawing water with steady, determined pulls on the rope. As he rowed closer, he could see that it was indeed Laura Zimmerman, and in the morning light, he could see her more clearly than he had in the dim pawnshop. She was beautiful, though not in the delicate way that men usually meant when they used that word. Her beauty was in the strength of her shoulders, the determination in her jaw, the way she moved with purpose despite the obvious exhaustion in her frame. Her hair was dark brown, almost black and pulled back in a practical bun. Her dress was simple and worn, faded from many washings, but clean and neatly mended. She looked to be in her mid-20s, young to be a widow, young to be facing such hardship alone. Laura looked up as he approached, wariness flashing across her face. She set down the bucket and wiped her hands on her apron, waiting as he dismounted. "Mrs. Zimmerman," Isaac said, removing his hat. "My name is Isaac Yates. I wonder if I might have a word with you." "If you are here about buying the ranch, the bank already owns most of it," Laura said, her voice flat. "You should speak with them." "No, madam, that is not why I am here." Isaac reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the ring. "I believe this belongs to you." Laura stared at the ring, her face going pale. "I do not understand. I sold that ring yesterday. How did you? "I bought it from the pawnbroker," Isaac said simply, "and I would like to return it to you." "I cannot accept that," Laura said, taking a step back. "I needed the money." "I do not have enough to buy it back from you." "I am not asking you to buy it back. I am giving it to you." Isaac held out the ring, watching as emotions flickered across her face. Confusion, hope, suspicion, and underneath it all, a desperate longing that made his chest ache. "Why would you do that?" Laura asked. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." "No, I do not," Isaac agreed. "But I know what it is like to lose someone. I know what it is like to have nothing left of them but memories. You should not have to give up this ring, Mrs. Zimmerman. It is yours." Laura looked at the ring, then at Isaac, then back at the ring. Slowly, as if afraid it might disappear, she reached out and took it from his palm. Her fingers brushed against his hand, and he felt a jolt of something unexpected, something he had not felt in years. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You cannot know what this means to me." "You are welcome," Isaac said. He started to turn back to his horse, but her voice stopped him. "Wait, please. Let me at least offer you some breakfast. It is not much, but you have ridden all the way out here, and it is the least I can do to thank you." Isaac knew he should refuse. He had business to attend to, a horse thief to track down, but something in her face made him nod. "That would be kind of you, madam. Thank you." Laura led him into the house, and Isaac was struck by how neat and orderly everything was, despite the obvious poverty. The furniture was simple but well maintained, the floor swept clean, and a vase of wildflowers sat on the table, bringing a splash of color to the modest room. "I have eggs and bacon," Laura said, moving to the stove, "and coffee. The coffee is good and strong." "That sounds perfect," Isaac said, taking a seat at the table. He watched as she moved around the small kitchen with practiced efficiency, her movements quick and sure. She had slipped the ring back onto her finger, and he could see her touching it occasionally, as if to reassure herself it was really there. They ate in companionable silence at first, but gradually, Laura began to relax, and they started to talk. She told him about Thomas, about how they had met at a church social in Tucson, and had fallen in love almost immediately. She told him about their dreams for the ranch, about the children they had planned to have, about the life they had been building together before the snake had stolen it all away. Isaac found himself talking too, telling her about his work as a cowboy, about the ranches he had worked and the trails he had ridden. He told her about Mary, about the brief year they had been married before the cholera took her. He found it surprisingly easy to talk to Laura, to share things he had not spoken about in years. I should let you get back to your work, Isaac said finally, standing up from the table. The sun was high in the sky, and he had already stayed much longer than he had intended. "Thank you again for returning my ring," Laura said, walking him to the door, "and for listening. I have not had anyone to talk to in a long time." "It was my pleasure, Mrs. Zimmerman," Isaac said. He hesitated, then added, "If you do not mind my saying so, you should not be paying the interest rates the bank is charging you. They are taking advantage of your situation." Laura's face hardened. "I know they are, but what choice do I have? If I do not pay, they take the ranch." "You could sell the cattle, buy land somewhere else where the water is better, and give up everything Thomas and I built. This ranch is all I have left of him. I cannot just walk away from it." Isaac nodded, understanding even if he did not necessarily agree. "Well, if you ever need help, you can find me at the hotel in town. I will be around for a while yet." "I will remember that. Thank you, Mr. Yates." Isaac rode back to Fort McDowell with his mind full of thoughts of Laura Zimmerman. He tried to focus on the task at hand, on finding the horse thief and recovering the stolen animals, but he kept thinking about the way she had looked at the ring, the quiet strength in her voice when she talked about her husband, the loneliness that had echoed in the small house. He was in dangerous territory, he knew. He had learned years ago not to get attached to places or people because his work kept him moving. But there was something about Laura that had gotten under his skin, something that made him want to stay to help, to be there for her in a way he had not wanted to be there for anyone in a long time. Over the next week, Isaac found himself riding out to the Zimmerman ranch more often than he should have. He told himself he was just checking on her, making sure she was all right, but the truth was more complicated than that. He enjoyed her company. He enjoyed the way she smiled when he arrived, the way her eyes lit up when they talked, the gradual easing of the grief and loneliness that had weighed so heavily on her. He started helping with the ranch work, fixing the fence line that Thomas had been checking when he died, repairing the roof of the barn where the wood had rotted through, helping her move the cattle to better grazing. Laura protested at first, insisting she could not pay him, but Isaac waved away her concerns. "I am not asking for payment," he said. "I am offering as a friend," and they had become friends, Isaac realized. Despite the short time they had known each other, despite the vast differences in their circumstances, they had formed a connection that felt as natural as breathing. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Laura told him about her childhood in Tucson, about her parents who had been schoolteachers, about her love of books and learning. Isaac told her about growing up on a small farm in Texas, about the brother who had died in the war, about the wanderlust that had driven him west after Mary's death. It was during the second week of their friendship that Isaac realized he was falling in love with her. They were sitting on the porch of her house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Laura was laughing at something he had said. The sound of her laughter filled something inside him that had been empty for too long, and he knew, with a certainty that was both exhilarating and terrifying, that he wanted to hear that sound for the rest of his life. But Laura was still in mourning. Thomas had been dead for only 4 months, and Isaac knew she was not ready to think about love again, not ready to consider a future with someone else. So he kept his feelings to himself and continued to help her, to be there for her as a friend, to wait and hope that someday she might see him as more than just the man who had returned her ring. The drought finally broke in September with a storm that rolled in from the south, bringing with it sheets of rain that soaked the parched earth and filled the dry creek beds. Laura stood on her porch, watching the rain fall, and felt something inside her loosen for the first time since Thomas died. The land would recover. The grass would grow. The cattle would fatten. She might actually be able to make the next payment to the bank without selling anything else. And Isaac was there, standing beside her on the porch, and she realized that at some point over the past month, he had become essential to her life. She looked forward to his visits, to the way he made her laugh, to the quiet comfort of his presence. She had started to notice things about him that had nothing to do with friendship. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his hands, the sound of his voice when he said her name. She was falling in love with him, she realized with a start. And the realization filled her with guilt, because how could she be falling in love when Thomas had been gone for such a short time? What kind of wife was she to forget her husband so quickly? But even as the guilt washed over her, she knew it was not that simple. She had not forgotten Thomas. She would never forget him, would never stop loving him or missing him. But Thomas was gone, and she was still here, still alive, and Isaac made her remember what it felt like to want to be alive, to look forward to tomorrow instead of just enduring it. "Are you all right?" Isaac asked, and Laura realized she had been quiet for too long. "Yes," she said softly, "I am just thinking." "About what?" Laura hesitated, then decided to be honest. "About you, about us, about what this is becoming." Isaac went very still beside her. "What do you think it is becoming?" "I do not know," Laura admitted. "I only know that when you are here, I feel less alone. When you are gone, I find myself counting the hours until you return. And I do not know if that is all right, if I am allowed to feel this way so soon after Thomas died." Isaac turned to face her, his expression serious. "Laura, there is no rule about grief, no timeline that says when you are allowed to be happy again. Thomas would not want you to spend the rest of your life alone, mourning him. He would want you to live, to be happy, to love again." "How do you know that?" Laura asked, her voice breaking. "Because if I died, I would want that for you," Isaac said simply. "If something happened to me tomorrow, I would want you to find someone who makes you happy, someone who will take care of you and love you the way you deserve to be loved. I would not want you to be alone." Laura felt tears streaming down her cheeks, though she had not realized she was crying. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid of losing someone again. I am afraid of being happy because I know how quickly it can be taken away." Isaac reached out and gently wiped the tears from her face. "I know. I am afraid too. But I think that is what love is, Laura. It is being afraid but doing it anyway because the alternative, living without love, is worse than any fear." "Are you saying you love me?" Laura asked, her heart pounding. "Yes," Isaac said, his voice steady and sure. "I love you. I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you walking out of that pawn shop, trying so hard to be brave. And if you need time, I will wait. I will wait as long as you need me to, but I wanted you to know how I feel." Laura looked up at him, at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known she was praying. He had given her back her ring, had helped save her ranch, had become her friend and her support, and now, maybe, something more. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both terrifying and wonderful in her mouth. "I do not know when it happened or how, but I do. I love you, Isaac." Isaac smiled, a slow, genuine smile that transformed his face, and then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her close as the rain continued to fall around them. Laura buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and for the first time since Thomas died, she felt something that resembled hope. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms while the storm washed the world clean around them. When they finally pulled apart, Isaac cupped her face in his hands and looked at her with such tenderness that it made her breath catch. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly, to give you time to be sure this is what you want. I do not want to rush you into anything." "I am sure," Laura said. I know it has not been long, and I know people will talk, but I am sure about you, Isaac. I am sure about us. Then I have something to ask you, Isaac said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out her wedding ring, the one he had returned to her that first day. May I? Laura held out her hand, confused, and watched as Isaac slipped the ring off her finger. For a moment, panic flared in her chest, but then he took her hand in both of his and said, "This ring represents your love for Thomas, and that love will always be a part of you. But I want to give you a new ring, one that represents our future together, our love for each other. Will you let me do that, Laura? Will you marry me?" Laura felt her breath catch, felt tears streaming down her face again, but this time they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Isaac pulled her into his arms again, kissing her for the first time, and Laura felt something inside her chest expand, felt the broken pieces of her heart beginning to knit back together. She had thought she would never feel this way again, never experience the joy and wonder of falling in love, but here it was, as unexpected and precious as a desert flower blooming after rain. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Fort McDowell. It was a simple ceremony, attended by the few friends Laura had made in town and the ranch hands Isaac had worked with over the years. Laura wore her best dress, a blue calico that had been her Sunday dress when Thomas was alive, and Isaac wore a new suit he had bought specially for the occasion. When the preacher asked if there were any objections, Laura half expected someone to stand up and condemn her for remarrying so quickly, but no one said a word. Instead, when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the small congregation erupted in applause and well wishes. Isaac had kept his promise about the ring. The day before the wedding, he had taken her to a jeweler in Phoenix, a 2-day trip by wagon, and helped her choose a new wedding band. It was simple but beautiful, gold like the first one but with a pattern of intertwined vines etched around the band. "So our lives will be intertwined," Isaac had said when she chose it. "Growing together, supporting each other." Now, as they stood in front of the church receiving congratulations from their guests, Laura touched both rings where they rested on the chain around her neck. She had decided to wear Thomas's ring as a necklace, keeping it close to her heart while wearing Isaac's ring on her finger. It felt right, a way to honor both the past and the future. The reception was held at the hotel, and Laura found herself laughing more than she had in months as friends and neighbors celebrated with them. Isaac never left her side, his hand always finding hers, his eyes always seeking her out across the room. She could see the love in his gaze, could feel the promise of the life they would build together, and her heart felt full to overflowing. As the sun began to set, Isaac took her hand and led her outside to where their wagon was waiting. He had decorated it with wildflowers and ribbons, and someone had tied old boots and cans to the back that would rattle and clang as they drove. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Yates?" Isaac asked, and Laura loved the sound of her new name on his lips. "Yes," she said, letting him help her up onto the wagon seat. "I am ready." They drove back to the ranch as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The night was cool and clear, and Laura leaned against Isaac's shoulder, feeling content and peaceful in a way she had not felt since before Thomas died. When they arrived at the ranch, Isaac surprised her by sweeping her up into his arms and carrying her over the threshold, making her laugh and protest that she was too heavy. But he just grinned and kissed her, carrying her inside and setting her down gently in the middle of the small front room. "Welcome home," he said softly. "It already was home," Laura said, "but now it feels complete." That night, they lay together in the bed that Laura had once shared with Thomas, and though she felt a moment of guilt, it passed quickly, replaced by the warmth of Isaac's arms around her, the tenderness of his touch, the whispered words of love and promise. This was not betrayal, she realized. This was healing. This was life continuing, love renewing itself, hope being reborn. The months that followed their wedding were the happiest Laura could remember since before Thomas died. Isaac proved to be everything she had hoped and more. He was patient and kind, strong and capable, and he loved her with a devotion that made her feel cherished and valued. Together, they worked to improve the ranch, using the money Isaac had saved from his years of working to buy more cattle and repair the buildings. The drought had broken, and with the rain came new grass and fresh hope. The cattle fattened, and by spring, they were able to sell a dozen head for a good price, enough to pay off the remaining debt to the bank and have money left over for improvements. Isaac also proved to be a skilled rancher, with ideas and knowledge gained from working on larger spreads. He taught Laura new techniques for managing the herd, for rotating grazing areas to keep the grass healthy, for breeding the cattle to produce stronger calves. Under their combined efforts, the ranch began to thrive. But it was not just the ranch that thrived. Laura herself began to bloom again, like a plant that had been withering from lack of water suddenly given a fresh rain. She smiled more, laughed more, found joy in the simple pleasures of daily life. She loved waking up next to Isaac, loved the quiet moments they shared over breakfast, loved working beside him during the day and falling asleep in his arms at night. Isaac was equally transformed. The restlessness that had driven him from place to place for years began to settle. He found himself thinking not about the next job, the next trail, the next town, but about the future he was building here with Laura. He thought about children, about growing old together, about putting down roots in a way he had not done since Mary died. In April, nearly 6 months after their wedding, Laura realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but she had been afraid to hope, afraid to be disappointed. But when the doctor in Fort McDowell confirmed it, she felt a rush of emotion so strong it made her dizzy. Joy, fear, excitement, gratitude, all swirling together until she could hardly breathe. She told Isaac that evening after supper. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, and she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is a baby," she said simply. "Our baby." Isaac stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable, and for a terrifying second, Laura thought he might not be happy about it. But then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that sent the nearby cattle scattering. "A baby," he said, pulling her into his arms. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Laura said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Isaac pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining. "Laura, I am more than happy. I am overjoyed. I am terrified and excited and grateful and 100 other things I do not have words for. A baby, our baby." They held each other as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and Laura felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was what Thomas would have wanted for her, she knew. Not for her to spend her life mourning him, but to live, to love, to build a new family and a new future. She would never forget him, would always carry him in her heart, but she could also move forward, could embrace this new chapter of her life with Isaac. The pregnancy was not easy. Laura suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and the Arizona heat made the later months uncomfortable. But Isaac was attentive and caring, doing everything he could to make her comfortable. He took over the heavier ranch work, insisted she rest when she looked tired, and rubbed her feet in the evenings when they swelled from the day's activities. As her belly grew, they talked about names and futures and dreams. Isaac wanted to expand the ranch, to build a bigger house where they could raise their growing family. Laura wanted to start a small school to teach the children in the area who had no access to education. They planned and dreamed together, their visions of the future intertwining just like the vines on Laura's wedding ring. In December of 1884, during a cold snap that had everyone in Fort McDowell complaining about the unusual weather, Laura went into labor. Isaac rode to town to fetch the doctor and the midwife, his horses' hooves pounding the frozen ground as he raced against time. By the time they returned to the ranch, Laura's pains were coming hard and fast. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Isaac paced outside the bedroom, feeling helpless and terrified as he listened to Laura's cries. He had helped birth countless calves and foals, but this was different. This was Laura, the woman he loved more than life itself, going through something he could not help her with, could not fix or make better. When the baby's first cry finally rang out, thin and lusty in the cold morning air, Isaac felt his knees go weak with relief. The midwife opened the door a moment later, a smile on her weathered face. "You have a son, Mr. Yates, a big, healthy boy, and your wife is doing well." Isaac barely heard the rest of what she said. He pushed past her into the room, his eyes immediately finding Laura. She was propped up against the pillows, exhausted but smiling, and in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a white blanket. "Come meet your son," Laura said softly, and Isaac crossed the room on shaking legs. The baby was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face. His eyes were squeezed shut, and his tiny fists waved in the air as he made small mewling sounds. Isaac reached out with one finger and gently touched the baby's hand. Immediately, the tiny fingers wrapped around his, gripping with surprising strength. "Hello, little one," Isaac whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I am your father." "What should we name him?" Laura asked, looking up at Isaac with tired but happy eyes. They had discussed names, but none of them had felt quite right. Now, looking down at his son, Isaac suddenly knew. "Thomas," he said. "Thomas Isaac Yates, if that is all right with you." Laura's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered. "That is perfect. Thomas would have been honored." And so Thomas Isaac Yates entered the world, bringing with him a new chapter in the lives of his parents. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, and he quickly became the center of their universe. Isaac proved to be a natural father, patient and loving, and Laura watched with wonder as this rough cowboy transformed into a gentle, devoted parent. The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch continued to prosper, allowing them to build the larger house Isaac had dreamed of. It was still modest by some standards, but it had 4 rooms instead of 2, with a real kitchen and a separate bedroom for Thomas. Laura started her school, teaching a dozen children in a small building Isaac built near the main house. She taught reading and writing and arithmetic, and the children loved her patient, encouraging manner. When Thomas was 3, Laura gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret Rose, after both of their mothers. She had Laura's dark hair and Isaac's blue eyes, and she was as spirited and determined as her mother. 2 years after that came another son, James, who was quieter and more thoughtful than his siblings but no less loved. Life was not always easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and difficult seasons. But through it all, Isaac and Laura faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. They built a life that was full of work and laughter, challenges and triumphs, the everyday joys and sorrows that make up a life well lived. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac took Laura back to Fort McDowell for a special dinner at the hotel. They left the children with a trusted neighbor and dressed in their finest clothes, feeling like young sweethearts instead of an old married couple. As they sat at dinner, Laura reached across the table and took Isaac's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Giving up your freedom, settling down in one place?" Isaac looked at her in surprise. "Regret it? Laura, marrying you and building this life with you is the best thing I have ever done. I was not free before I met you. I was just lost, wandering from place to place with no purpose, no home. You gave me a reason to stay, a reason to build something lasting. How could I ever regret that?" "I love you," Laura said, her voice thick with emotion. "I love Thomas, and I will always be grateful for the time we had together. But I love you too, Isaac, in a different way but no less deeply. You saved me, you know. When you returned my ring that day, you gave me back more than just a piece of jewelry. You gave me hope. You gave me a reason to keep going. You saved me too," Isaac said, "in more ways than you know." They finished their dinner and walked back to the hotel where they were staying the night. As they lay in bed together, Laura thought about the long, winding path that had brought them to this moment. The love and loss, the hardship and triumph, the moments of despair and the unexpected gifts of grace. She thought about the day she had been forced to sell her wedding ring, thinking it was the end of everything. But it had been a beginning instead, the start of a new chapter she had not known she needed. Isaac had bought that ring and returned it to her finger, but in doing so, he had given her so much more. He had given her love and partnership, a family and a future, a reason to hope and dream again. As she drifted off to sleep, safe in Isaac's arms, Laura touched the two rings she still wore, one on the chain around her neck and one on her finger. Both were precious. Both represented love and commitment and the vows that bound two lives together. And both had brought her here, to this moment, to this life that was more than she had ever imagined possible. The years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of their children growing up. Thomas grew into a strong, capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his parents did. He learned everything Isaac could teach him about cattle and horses, about reading the land and the weather, about the hard work and dedication it took to make a life in the Arizona territory. Margaret Rose proved to be as intelligent as she was beautiful, with a quick mind and a love of learning that rivaled her mother's. She helped Laura with the school, and they talked about her perhaps becoming a teacher herself one day, maybe even going to normal school in Phoenix to get her teaching certificate. James was the dreamer of the family, always with his nose in a book or his head in the clouds. He loved to draw and paint, capturing the harsh beauty of the desert landscape in his sketches. Isaac worried at first that James would not be suited to ranch life, but Laura reminded him that there were many ways to make a living, many paths a life could take. When Thomas Jr. turned 18, Isaac officially made him a partner in the ranch. They had a small ceremony, drawing up papers that split the ownership 3 ways between Isaac, Laura, and Thomas. It was a proud moment for all of them, a recognition that the legacy they had built would continue into the next generation. Margaret Rose did indeed go to normal school, graduating with honors and returning to Fort McDowell to start a proper school in town. The little building near the ranch became too small for the number of students who wanted to learn, and the town finally agreed to fund a real schoolhouse. Margaret Rose was hired as the head teacher, and Laura could not have been more proud. James surprised them all by announcing at age 16 that he wanted to go to San Francisco to study art. It was a bold dream, one that would take him far from home, but Isaac and Laura supported him, using their savings to send him to a school where he could develop his talent. He wrote them long letters describing the city and his studies, and his paintings began to sell, first to local galleries and then to collectors from as far away as New York. As Laura and Isaac grew older, they spent more time on the porch of their house, watching the sunset and remembering the years they had shared. Their hair turned gray, their faces lined with age and sun and laughter, but their love remained as strong as ever. On the evening of their 25th wedding anniversary, their children surprised them with a party. Thomas and his wife brought their 3 grandchildren. Margaret Rose came with her husband and 2 daughters. Even James made the long trip from San Francisco, bringing with him a painting he had made specially for the occasion. It showed the ranch house at sunset, with 2 figures sitting on the porch, hand in hand. "That is beautiful, James," Laura said, tears in her eyes. "You have captured it perfectly." "It is how I remember home," James said. "The 2 of you together, watching the sunset. That image has stayed with me no matter how far I have traveled." That night, after the guests had left and the house was quiet again, Isaac and Laura sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The stars were bright overhead, and a cool breeze brought relief from the day's heat. 25 years, Laura said softly. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you walked up to this ranch with my ring in your pocket. Other times it feels like we have been together forever." "I know what you mean," Isaac said. He reached over and took her hand, his thumb rubbing over the wedding ring she still wore. "I have never regretted a single day, Laura, not one." "Neither have I," Laura said. She reached up and touched the chain around her neck where Thomas's ring still rested. "I am grateful for all of it, for Thomas and the love we shared, for you and the life we have built, for our children and grandchildren, for every moment, good and bad, that brought us to this place." "Do you think Thomas would be happy with how things turned out?" Isaac asked. It was a question he had asked before over the years, needing reassurance that he had not taken something that was not meant to be his. "I know he would," Laura said firmly. "Thomas loved me, and he would have wanted me to be happy, to be loved, to have a full life. You gave me that, Isaac. You gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. Laura thought about the woman she had been that day in the pawn shop, desperate and grieving, selling the symbol of her love to save the land where that love had grown. She had thought she was giving up everything, surrendering to the harsh realities of life, but she had been wrong. Sometimes the things we lose come back to us in unexpected ways, transformed and renewed. The ring had come back, brought by a kind stranger who became her salvation and her love. The ranch had been saved and had prospered beyond her wildest dreams. Her heart, which she thought was broken beyond repair, had healed and loved again. Life was like that, Laura had learned. Full of loss and heartbreak, yes, but also full of unexpected grace, second chances, and the possibility of renewal. You just had to be open to it, brave enough to accept the gifts that came your way, even when they arrived in forms you did not expect. As they finally stood to go inside, Isaac pulled Laura close and kissed her, and she felt the same flutter in her heart that she had felt the first time he kissed her all those years ago. Some things, she thought with a smile, never changed. The seasons continued their endless cycle, and Isaac and Laura settled into the comfortable rhythms of their later years. They spent their days working on the ranch with Thomas, spoiling their grandchildren, and enjoying the peace that comes from a life well lived. They had their health and each other, and that was more than enough. One spring morning, when Laura was 60 years old and Isaac was 64, she woke to find him already up and dressed, standing by the window looking out at the sunrise. "What are you doing up so early?" she asked, stretching. "I could not sleep," Isaac said, turning to smile at her. "I wanted to watch the sunrise from the top of the ridge. Come with me." They had not ridden up to the ridge in years, but Laura found herself nodding. They dressed warmly, saddled 2 horses, and rode out as the sky began to lighten in the east. The ride took longer than it used to, their bodies not as spry as they once were, but they made it to the top of the ridge just as the sun broke over the horizon. The view was spectacular, the whole valley spread out below them, bathed in golden light. Their ranch was there, the house and barns looking small from this distance, the cattle just dark dots against the brown and green of the land. Beyond, they could see the mountains, still snow-capped despite the warming weather. "It is beautiful," Laura breathed. "It is," Isaac agreed, "but that is not why I brought you up here." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I have something for you." "Isaac, it is not my birthday or our anniversary," Laura protested, but she opened the box anyway. Inside was a delicate gold locket, engraved with the same pattern of intertwined vines that decorated her wedding ring. "Open it," Isaac said softly. Laura opened the locket and gasped. Inside were two tiny photographs. One showed Thomas, her first husband, young and smiling in his wedding suit. The other showed Isaac, taken on their wedding day, looking at the camera with love in his eyes. "I know you still wear Thomas's ring around your neck," Isaac said. "And I have never wanted you to forget him or stop honoring his memory. But I thought maybe you would like to have both of them close to your heart, literally. Both the men who loved you, both the loves that have shaped your life." Laura felt tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Isaac. This is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me. Thank you. Thank you so much." He helped her fasten the locket around her neck, and she tucked it beneath her blouse, feeling the weight of it settle over her heart. It felt right, having them both there, the past and the present, the love that was and the love that is. They sat on the ridge for a long time, talking about their life together, about the children and grandchildren, about the years that had passed, and the years they hoped were still to come. When they finally rode back down to the ranch, Laura felt a sense of peace and completeness that was almost overwhelming. The years continued to be kind to them. They celebrated their 30th anniversary surrounded by family, including 6 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. James's paintings were shown in galleries across the country, and he dedicated a major exhibition to his parents, featuring landscapes of the Arizona Territory and scenes from ranch life. Thomas and his wife took over more and more of the ranch work as Isaac slowed down, but Isaac was content to step back, to advise rather than direct, to enjoy his grandchildren rather than work himself to exhaustion. Margaret Rose's school had become one of the best in the territory, and she had trained several younger teachers who carried on her methods and values. On a warm evening in autumn, when Laura was 68 and Isaac was 72, they sat on their porch as they always did, watching the sunset. Isaac had been quieter than usual lately, more contemplative, and Laura had been watching him with concern. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked, taking his hand. "I am fine," Isaac assured her. "Just thinking about how lucky I have been, how lucky we have been." "We have been blessed," Laura agreed. "I want you to know something," Isaac said, turning to look at her. "If something happens to me if I go first, I do not want you to spend the rest of your life mourning me any more than you spent the rest of your life mourning Thomas. You are a woman who deserves to be loved, Laura. You deserve to be happy." "Isaac, please do not talk like that," Laura said, gripping his hand tighter. "You are going to be fine. We have years left together." "I hope so," Isaac said. "But I am older than you, and eventually one of us will have to say goodbye. I just wanted you to know that if it is me, I want you to live, Laura. Really live. Do not shut yourself away with grief. Keep teaching, keep loving, keep being the amazing woman you are." Laura pulled his hand to her lips and kissed it. "I promise. But you have to promise me the same thing. If I go first, you will not stop living either." "I promise," Isaac said, though they both knew it was a promise that would be hard to keep. But fortune smiled on them, and the years continued to pass with both of them healthy and together. They celebrated their 35th anniversary, their 40th, each milestone feeling like a gift. Their family continued to grow, with grandchildren getting married and having children of their own. The ranch prospered under Thomas's management, and the Yates family became one of the most respected in the territory. When Arizona became a state in 1912, Isaac and Laura were in the crowd in Phoenix, watching the ceremonies with pride. They were in their 80s by then, frail but still sharp-minded, still devoted to each other. They had lived through the transformation of the Wild West from a rough, lawless territory to a settled, civilized state, and they had played their part in that transformation. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration that lasted 3 days. There were over 40 family members present, from James and his wife who traveled from San Francisco to the youngest great-great-grandchild, just 6 months old. A photographer came from Phoenix to take a family portrait, and the resulting image showed 4 generations of Yates, all descended from the love between a grieving widow and a kind cowboy. At the celebration, Thomas Jr. stood up to give a toast. "My father once told me the story of how he and my mother met," he said. "How he saw her leaving the pawn shop, selling her wedding ring because she had no other choice. How he bought that ring and returned it to her, starting a chain of events that led to all of us being here today. I have thought about that story many times over the years, and I realized something. My father did not just return a ring that day. He returned hope. He returned the possibility of love and joy and a future. And from that one act of kindness, all of this grew." He gestured around at the gathered family. "So I want to toast my parents, to Isaac and Laura, whose love has been the foundation of all our lives. Thank you for showing us what it means to love well, to live fully, and to never give up hope." Everyone raised their glasses, and Laura felt Isaac's hand find hers under the table, squeezing gently. She looked over at him and saw tears in his eyes matching her own. "Did we do all right?" Isaac whispered to her. "We did better than all right," Laura whispered back. "We did wonderfully." As the celebration wound down and the family members began to drift away to their homes, Isaac and Laura sat on their porch one more time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and pink. They had sat here thousands of times over the past 50 years, in every season, through every kind of weather. This porch had been witness to their love, to their conversations and dreams, to the quiet moments that make up a marriage. 50 years, Laura said softly. "When you walked up to this ranch with my ring in your pocket, did you ever imagine we would have 50 years together?" "No," Isaac admitted. "I did not imagine we would have any years together. I just knew I had to return the ring. Everything else was a gift I never expected." "The best gifts are the ones we do not expect," Laura said. She touched the locket at her throat, the one that held pictures of both her husbands, both the great loves of her life. "I have been so blessed. 2 wonderful marriages, beautiful children, a life full of love and purpose." "Not many people get one great love. I got 2. And I got my one," Isaac said, bringing her hand to his lips. "You were my one and only, Laura. From the moment I saw you, I knew my wandering days were over. You were my home." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, holding hands as they had done for 50 years. The ranch was quiet around them, the cattle settled for the night, the children and grandchildren safely home. Everything was as it should be. Isaac and Laura lived another 3 years after that anniversary, years marked by increasing frailty but no lessening of love. They were rarely apart, still sleeping in the same bed they had shared since their wedding night, still taking meals together, still sitting on the porch at sunset. When Isaac finally passed away in his sleep at the age of 85, Laura was beside him, holding his hand, whispering that she loved him and always would. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, from family members to old ranch hands to students Laura had taught decades before. Isaac was buried in the Fort McDowell Cemetery, and Laura visited his grave every day, bringing flowers and talking to him about the family and the ranch and the everyday details of life. She lived another 2 years after Isaac died, years that were harder and lonelier than anything she had experienced since Thomas's death. But she kept her promise to Isaac. She did not shut herself away with grief. She continued to help Margaret Rose at the school when she was able. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, delighting in the newest generation of Yates. She lived, as Isaac had asked her to, even though living without him was harder than she had imagined possible. When Laura passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 89, she was buried next to Isaac. The gravestone bore both their names and the dates of their long lives, but also an inscription that Laura had chosen years before. Together we built a life of love. The ranch stayed in the family, passing through the generations. The house where Isaac and Laura had lived was preserved, turned into a museum of sorts where family members could visit and remember the couple who had started it all. The rings were preserved too, both of them. Thomas's original wedding ring and the one Isaac had given Laura were displayed side by side in a place of honor, reminding future generations of the love and loss and second chances that had shaped their family's history. And sometimes, when the sun was setting and the light hit the house just right, family members swore they could see two figures sitting on the porch, hand in hand, watching the sky turn gold and orange and pink. They were just shadows, just tricks of the light, but they made people smile and remember the love story that had started with a widow selling her ring and a cowboy buying it back. It was a story about loss and love, about grief and hope, about the courage it takes to love again after your heart has been broken. It was a story about kindness and second chances, about building a life and a family and a legacy that would last for generations. But most of all, it was a story about a ring, and the two people who understood that its value had nothing to do with gold and everything to do with love. The end.